Hi everyone, welcome. Who said yes, it's time? That's perfectly enthusiastic. Love to see it. Hi everyone, I'm Sonja Evertsson Mellström. I have the pleasure of moderating this roundtable today as part of the Stranger Families project. And we have Apostolos Antikopoulos with us today, Bridget Anderson, Anne-Marie Daoust, and Saskia Bonjour. I will present the speakers in a little bit. But firstly, I'd like to say thank you to all of you who have been part of the last day and a half of workshopping, and also thank you to everyone who is here now for this public part of the workshop. So about 4 years ago, a bit more, Saskia started a project entitled Stranger Families, a project that set out to explore migration rights for non-normative families in Europe. And the project began by asking questions familiar to many of us in the room, such as who decides what proper family is, who counts as family in different European contexts, and what kind of families are deserving enough to live together in Europe. And the questions of who counts as family, romantic sexual partners, spouses, children, close friends, parents, grandparents, is a key defining question to migration politics in Europe today, as the holders of a valid permanent residency in Europe in 2022 are 36% of family migrants. So the questions that have served as a catalyst for this project that Saskia initiated have been asked for a long time. They are questions regularly asked by people who fall outside the dominant norms of what a family is supposed to be. Families deemed as strange because they are intergenerational, they do not fit into the nuclear model, they are queer in some sense, they are polyamorous, they are polygamous. They can also be families composed of strangers, non-EU citizens, or international, interracial families comprised of citizens and non-citizens. So from colonial to post-colonial times and within colonial continuities in contemporary politics, defining collective identities and their boundaries, if they are cultural, racial, religious, or national, inevitably contains these distinctions between who are we, who are them, and these boundaries between us and them are often drawn in the most intimate spheres. Who do we marry? How do we do intimacy? How do we raise children properly? And who does not do it in the way that we like? We know that the drawing of these boundaries, who we deem of worthy of belonging, worthy of love, worthy of humanity, and worthy of grieving, play out materially and have very concrete outfalls in the everyday politics of national belonging. We know this by looking at the European histories of colonialism, its continuities in the Holocaust, the deadliness of the European borders of the Mediterranean today, and we see it in the rise of right-wing populism. We also see this clearly playing out before our eyes as people have loved and continue to lose loved ones in Palestine, in Israel, and we have seen how Gaza, under Israeli bombardments, has turned into a graveyard for children. The issues that we work on, the words we use, the silences that we choose, have immediate effects on the work we do and how we can speak on topics. So it's important to be mindful of that. And I am so happy, I have been looking forward to this for such a long time, and I know you also have, of having the pleasure of being joined by this fantastic group of speakers that in different ways and across different contexts have explored the complex intersectional politics of family and post and colonial contexts, and who delve into what intimacy and kinship and family can be. So first of all, we have Apostolos Antikopoulos, who is a Marie Curie Global Fellow at Harvard University and the University of Amsterdam. His research focuses on themes such as kinship and marriage, migration and citizenship, as well as gender and sexuality. His book, Argonauts of West Africa, Unauthorized Migration and Kinship Dynamics in Changing Europe, examines the paradoxes of kinship in the lives of unauthorized African migrants as they struggle for mobility, employment, and citizenship in Europe. Bridget Anderson is the Director of Migration Mobilities Bristol and Professor of Migration Mobilities and Citizenship at the University of Bristol, where she works in both the Faculty of Social Sciences and Law, as well as the School of Sociology, Politics, and International Relations. Her research highlights ethical, political, and epistemic problematics through the interplay of the relations between migration temporalities and future-making claims. She's also the author of the well-known book, Us and Them, The Dangerous Politics of Immigration Controls. Anne-Marie Daoust is Professor of Political Science and holder of the New Canada Research Chair on the Security Governance of Bodies, Mobility and Borders at the Université du Québec at Montréal. Her work interrogates the connections between love, corporeality, and the governance of mobility. She recently edited a collective work, Transnational Marriage and Partner Migration, Constellations of Security, Citizenship and Rights, published in 2022. Lastly, but surely not least, Saskia Bonjour, who is the associate professor in political science at the University of Amsterdam and leader of the Stranger Families project that leads us here today. Her research is about the politics of migration and citizenship in the Netherlands and in Europe, with a particular focus on the role of family, gender, and sexuality norms in the construction of national, cultural, and racial identities. So, we now have 2 very exciting hours in front of us. And as for the first question, Saskia has asked everyone to bring an object that in some way allows the speakers to talk about the significance of family in relation to kinship, gender, sexuality, as that is, and migration, so in terms of mobility, nation, and other categories of. So what have you brought that signifies these themes in your work and or life, and why? So we will begin with Apostolos.
Okay. Thank you very much. So as an anthropologist who works on kinship and migration, and with a special interest in identity documents, I couldn't bring anything else but an identity document, a birth certificate, of one of my research participants. Actually, this is a copy of a birth certificate of a woman I will call Christy. She's an Italian citizen of Ghanaian descent. And this is a document, or this is a copy of a document that has not been produced by official Ghanaian authorities, but by an intermediary. So identity documents are material expressions of citizenship, as Bridget Anderson very aptly has characterized them, and tangible evidence of bureaucratic inscription, to use Sarah Orton's term. Through identity documents and documentation, the state establishes its relation to its subject, to its citizens, and renders that relationship recognizable, tangible, and therefore governable. And not only the relation between the state and the citizen, but also the relations, the social relationships of citizens, so their family relations. It renders these relationships recognizable, and so that the state can intervene, can provide rights, can impose obligations, and so on. So let me briefly tell you the history behind this document. So Christy is a person who was born in Ghana, and it is uncertain who her biological father is. And that is because Christy's mother used to work as a sex worker in Ghana, and most likely her biological father was one of her mother's clients. So when her mother gave birth to Christy, she left her with relatives in Ghana, and she migrated as an undocumented migrant in Italy, where she also started working as a sex worker. And she met one Italian man with whom she got married. And through that marriage, she applied for a legalization of her status. Nevertheless, Italian authorities suspected that this marriage was a so-called marriage of convenience, like they saw that there's a sex worker with an Italian man, so there were all these assumptions there. So they turned down her request for legalization. So what they did was to go back to Ghana, where they produced that document, where the document mentioned the name of that particular Italian man as Christie's father. And then on this ground, and with that document, Christie's mother managed to get her status legalized in Italy, but also Christie managed to join her mother in Italy. So now, to conclude, because I know we have limited time, so for all of you who might have thought right away that this is a fake document, or I told you that this is a copy anyways, I would like you to pause and reflect the following: that it is a document that had very real effects, and also that this Italian man is the person who has actually been a father for Christie. He was the one who was responsible for her upbringing, and he is the one that Christie recognizes as her father.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bridget, please.
Thank you. Well, I've been a typical academic, and I bought a book, and it's actually, so it's a book that I've authored, but that you won't find in any of my academic bios. So it's, I authored it with my brother, Stephen, and it's a mixture of a history and cookery book. And so it's a history of Burma under British colonialism, told through the story of my grandmother, who I interviewed over many years and it's got lots of nice pictures of food, but also sort of, I don't know, I can share it around if you want, but also sort of pictures of our family, yeah. And I suppose I thought of it for various reasons. So one is that it's quite often struck me that in the UK anyway, when you're in a room full of migration scholars, you look around and you think, wow, actually most people in this room have migration histories or some, but they never ever say it. It's not like gender studies or race studies where those identities are on the table. Migration, there's a kind of reticence, which I think is to do with class, and I think there's interesting things about that. But so it's partly that, and also, so it tells the story of how we ended up in the UK. But then also, we've used this book. So my brother has a restaurant in Spain, and we've used the book to promote the idea of, so that he's got a Southeast Asian / Burmese restaurant in Valencia, if anyone ever goes there. And it's very nice and quite reasonably priced. But it also has as its strapline decolonial food. So, and that comes from this book. Is like, so we've been trying to imagine. So this is my moonlighting, non-academic self. But we've been trying to imagine what would decolonial food look like, and it's a rebellion against the idea of authenticity. So that's why it's related to my personal story, I suppose.
Thank you. I decided to share something more related to my personal history as well. So for today, I brought my husband's wedding band. So my husband and I have been together for 21 years now, so it's been a while. But we both come from Quebec, which has the lowest marriage rate in the world, with about 42% of all couples living in civil law partnership, which is more than Sweden, Finland, or the Netherlands for that matter. And so very early on, we decided that we didn't want to get married. But in 2005, I was admitted to a PhD program in the United States. My husband was also completing his PhD, and so very quickly it appeared that if we wanted to be together, we would have no choice but to get married so that he could come with me to the United States. And now the funny thing is that even though I love my husband, the situation got me very upset because I didn't want to get married, which didn't make sense to most people, right? As we love each other, right? So we got married. But for me, it has always felt imposed, even though we loved each other. I think my mom is listening right now to streaming, so I just want to reiterate that. And so as some kind of act of rebellion, if you want, against this, we decided to make the choice never to wear our wedding bands. But sometimes my husband had to go back to Canada to see his family or see his supervisor, and every time he would cross the border back to the United States, he would always face harsh interrogations by the border guard. Was he aware he was not allowed to work in the US as the husband of a PhD student? How could we live if he could not work? And also, how come he didn't have any wedding band if he was supposed on a husband visa? And so for him, the gender bias in marriage migration made each trip to the US very difficult. Whereas as a visitor, he's a white man, he never had any problem. And so very quickly he decided that, well, he would wear his wedding band every time he had to cross the border back to the United States, because there people noticed. But in the US, it was very difficult for people to understand our position. Like, yes, you're married, you're not wearing a wedding band, and there's something peculiar about the US and marriage in general as well. And so interestingly, though, even though, again, we love each other, nobody in the US ever raised the issue that our marriage might be one of convenience. And yet, we could make the case that we didn't marry for immigration purposes, right? But for them, love was there and came first. So for them, our situation had really nothing to do with being fraudulent. And also it had nothing to do with the so-called mail order brides I was studying for my own PhD dissertation. So I would say that this personal experience made me very curious early on about the political work love might or might not do when it comes to migration issues. And perhaps to conclude, you might wonder why I only bought my husband's band, right? He has his own experience. Well, to be honest, I lost the first one in 2007 and the second one in 2009. So after that, we decided this would be a very poor investment. So I can thank my husband to be able to bring you this artifact today. I actually don't need that. You don't need it. Thank you. Yeah, am I...
Yeah, it's on here, but it should...
I don't know. Should I do something?
I don't hear you.
Is it on now? Ooh, it is on now. What I brought is a photo album. It's a family photo album. So I love making these. I try to make one for each year, and since I've been in school forever, I make them for academic years instead of for calendar years. And to my great joy, my children also love looking at them. So they're really, they take them out of the bookcase and they look at them, and they're a way of documenting our family history. And they're super private, right? Even to me, showing them on a screen, or today to you, like sitting on a podium, is a really weird thing. I'm also not going to open it. I chose one which doesn't show my children too much, like I thought about this beforehand. But if I were in a transnational family, I would very likely have to show this to immigration officials and to judges and to lawyers, because this could be a really valuable, like the birth certificate, but in a different kind of way. This could be a really valuable item to prove the quality of my love, either for my partner or for my children, or the quality of my parenting. I was struck, and holding it here helps me imagine a little bit what that could be like. A little bit, not really. I was struck in a lawyer that I interviewed last year told me about the troubles that one of their clients had, because they also had lots of pictures of their children, and they submitted them as part of their file to the immigration office. And the immigration office came back with, there are lovely pictures of your children, but you're not in them, so that doesn't actually help. Like, we can't use this. And I'm barely ever in the pictures either, because like the father, the client, I'm the one who takes the pictures in our family, so I'm never in them. So that resonated with me, and it's another part of, so it's both, for me, this is both about having to submit your intimacy to state scrutiny, which some people have to do and others do not. And it's about then, once you do that, like what kind of obstacles do you encounter of very different kinds to then be able to prove what it is that you're expected to prove. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Do you have any comments or reflections in relation to what the others presented?
Yeah, just on that, I was really struck. I was struck by that because so in the UK we used to have a au pair regulation. You know, used to have an au pair used to be an immigration status, and so when there was the minimum wage was brought in, then there was a big sort of fuss was made by au pair agencies because they didn't want the minimum wage to apply to au pairs, because the whole point of au pairs is they're not supposed to be workers and you're not supposed to have to pay them very much. So so when the minimum wage law was passed, there was this caveat that you don't, one of the times you don't have to pay the minimum wage is when you're treated as part of the family. And then that raised the question of what does it mean to be considered to be part of the family? And there was some case about this, and the one of the kind of signs came to be that you should be in the photographs that are displayed in the living room or publicly displayed in the house. And the au pair agencies really didn't like that, because actually people don't tend to put the photographs of their au pairs with the families in sort of public places. So I think this question of absence from photographs is really interesting, and when photographs are displayed, and because there always seems to me, like, I don't know if it's a peculiarly British thing, but people kind of like have loads of photos of themselves and their kids all around the house, almost like an assertion of this is who we are. So yeah, I think that was interesting. We were just.
Thank you. Does anyone else of you want to speak on the family life documentation shortly? Yes, of course.
I may have like a brief comment that, as Bridget says, that all of us, or many of us, have stories that are relevant and very often like remain invisible, or we do not consider them relevant. And I think that the story of Anne-Marie resonates with the experiences of several of our colleagues. I've heard a story of a colleague who has the same fellowship as I have now, the Marie Curie Fellowship, for which there is a generous family bonus. And in order to qualify for this bonus, you need to be either married or have children. So this colleague really rushed to marry his partner just 1 week before the deadline. Otherwise, he couldn't qualify. But then, the interesting thing is that examples like this would never raise suspicions that these are marriages of convenience, that they would never attract
very interesting themes.